It was the height of the baby boom, and the Galvin family kept growing. 12 children, 10 boys, 2 girls. What they didn't expect was what came next, and that half would be diagnosed with schizophrenia.
One of the worst lies in American history was hidden behind the perfect white picket fence of a house in Colorado. 12 kids. 6 were told they had schizophrenia.
You'll be seeing more of the Galvin family soon. Charlize Theron has contacted Lindsay and is creating a mini-series to raise awareness of schizophrenia.
Evil, fear, and genius are all squished together in one building. Things about the Galvin family seemed like the American dream.
These are the Galvins, 10 boys, 2 girls. Good looks run in the family, so does schizophrenia.
But they turned out to be the scariest mystery in science. It's not just a story about crazy people. It's also a scary look at genetics, trauma, and the cost of being perfect. Wait until you see what happened next. It will blow your mind. The American Dream Family. On the outside, the Galvin family looked like any other American family from the 1960s. After coming home from the Pacific, Donald Galvin Sr. was a decorated World War II warrior who had invisible scars from the battles he had survived. He became a teacher at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs after joining the new Air Force and making a name for himself in the field. His wife, Mimi, was very religious, very strict, and determined to raise a family that was successful, good, and true to custom. They both worked toward a version of the American dream that required perfection in every way. From 1945 to 1965, the Galvins had 12 children. 10 boys came quickly after each other, then 2 girls. There was Donald Jr., James, John, Brian, Michael, Richard, Joseph, Mark, Matthew, Peter, Margaret, and Mary, who later changed her name to Lindsay. Each child seemed to support the idea of success. The boys were tall, athletic, and competitive. They were great at football, hockey, wrestling, and games outside. For the time, falconry and hunting were unusual but powerful hobbies. They showed discipline, skill, and bold masculinity. Friends and neighbors saw the family as a model of order, skill, and faith, because they always went to church on Sundays. Cracks were appearing behind the scenes, despite what people thought. Donald Sr. called his kids by numbers instead of names, which was a sly way of showing that he was emotionally distant and in charge. The rules were strict and military-like, and there was constant physical fighting between boys, which the parents often didn't notice. Because Mimi cared a lot about how things looked, she made sure the house was spotless before she dealt with problems or her own mental needs. It was stressful because everyone felt like they had to be perfect. Mistakes or strange behavior were not allowed. The kids felt anxious and stressed because of this hidden expectation, which would later turn into something much worse, especially the oldest boys who had to carry this weight that no one could see. They were expected to do well in school, sports, and social situations, while also keeping up the family's perfect image. Anything that wasn't normal or successful was met with quiet disapproval or punishment, which made them fear and question themselves. This set off a cycle in which stress and loneliness became linked to desire and success. The Galvin kids grew up in a home that expected them to be perfect, but didn't offer much social support. This would have an effect on their mental health later on. When you think about how these family relationships will affect people in the long run, you get a new perspective. The drive for perfection may have created an unintended pressure cooker, where small disagreements turned into extreme actions. The kids were under a lot of stress because they had to deal with a lot of demands and couldn't change how they felt. This made them more likely to develop mental illnesses because of their genes. In their search for the perfect American family, the Galvins unintentionally made secret, denial, and emotional suppression stronger. This strain that they couldn't see changed not only who they were, but also how their minds and hearts worked. The people in the neighborhood never knew about these problems. From the outside, the Galvins seemed like they were very successful and proper, because they went to church every week and held parties. Their big, sporty, and well-known family made them a model of what many people thought was the ideal home. But when no one was around, there was non-stop rivalry, fear, and competition. The boys got into fights, tried being violent, and came up with ways to deal with stress that their parents didn't understand or keep an eye on. Even the parents had problems that made the family what it was. After the war, Donald Sr. was emotionally distant and irritable, and Mimi's need to be perfect covered up her own worries and hurts. Their parenting style put more value on looks than on empathy, which made the home a place where feelings were controlled and individualism was limited. Children learned to hide their feelings and meet impossible standards by internalizing these lessons. Over time, the extreme stress, strict rules, and lack of privacy made it a very dangerous place for mental illness to develop. The perfect son, who could do no wrong until the darkness inside him erupted in ways no one could ignore. The Golden Boy's descent. The Galvins' oldest son, Donald Galvin Jr., was the perfect child for them. He was born in 1945 and did very well in sports. In high school in Colorado Springs, he was a football star and a wrestling champion. People liked him because he was confident and charming. And at the Air Force Academy, he dated the daughter of a key general. His family and neighbors thought he was the perfect kid and that he would do well in everything. But behind the charm, Donald Jr. started to feel like there was an unseen wall between him and everyone else that he couldn't explain. Small, upsetting behaviors started to show up when he was a teenager, and at first they were hard to notice. His friends and family were shocked when he ran into a flame one night for no reason. Other things that happened were less obvious but still scary. Hurting animals or breaking things for no reason. Even when he was in college at Colorado State University, his behavior got worse, going from doing strange things to acting on dangerous urges. Roommates saw the boy they knew slowly change into someone they couldn't recognize. This was a sign that something more serious was going on. The signs kept happening and got worse when Donald Jr. got home. He broke dishes in the kitchen sink for no reason, put salt in the family tank, and moved furniture around the house without a plan. The family was scared and angry because none of the actions made sense. His parents didn't pay much attention to these early episodes because they found it hard to understand how his good grades could fit with his strange behavior. His inner confusion became more obvious as he got older, despite the fact that he seemed perfect on the outside. It got too much when Donald Jr. got married young and moved out with his wife, Jean. His behavior became angrier and more unpredictable, which proved that his illness was not short-term or situational. He tried to kill his wife by making her breathe in cyanide fumes, which was a shocking act that made his family face how bad his situation was. After he was taken to the state mental hospital in Pueblo, Colorado, doctors finally told him he had schizophrenia. The family was shocked when a major mental disorder was confirmed. It showed them the danger that was hiding behind their perfect image. Donald Jr.'s illness had an effect on the whole family. His siblings, who used to look up to him as an example of how to do well in life, now saw directly what mental illness was really like. It was clear from his battles that being smart, athletic, or popular did not protect you from serious mental illnesses. The family started to understand that there was something biological, not behavioral, going on that they could not change. This discovery set off a journey that would include decades of study, discovery, and advocacy. The link between worry, environment, and vulnerability is something that is often missed. High expectations and constant pressure on Donald Jr. to do well may have combined with his genetic predisposition to make him more likely to get sick. His story shows how early warning signs can show up in homes that look great. No one outside the family could have imagined that such a bright kid would become a tragedy in the history of mental health. The stress of having to be perfect probably made him feel even more alone and made his inner battles worse. At the time, the family didn't know much about schizophrenia. In the 1960s, psychiatry often said that parents, particularly mothers, were to blame for their crazy kids. Doctors at first thought that Mimi's illness was her fault because she had done everything right by society's standards. These old ideas made people feel guilty and ashamed, which made parents and experts fight instead of focusing on treatment. The Galvins quickly realized that Donald Jr.'s illness had nothing to do with how they raised him. This understanding would help them in their future study. The dominoes fall. Donald Jr.'s downfall was just the beginning of a terrible chain of events. Slowly but surely, each of the Galvin brothers started to show signs of serious mental illness in their own unique way. At first, James, the second oldest, seemed normal. He was charming and reliable, but deep down, he was becoming more and more suspicious. He started to believe that voices were telling him that evil forces were planning to hurt him. James turned into someone who could hurt and abuse others because of the stresses of family expectations and his growing schizophrenia. In the family, Brian, the fourth child, was the singing star and a source of hope. He moved to California to follow his dreams because he was smart, friendly, and full of potential. It looked like Brian was safe from the family curse for a while, but his insanity stayed hidden because he was so charismatic and determined. Suddenly, he killed his girlfriend and then himself, shocking his family and leaving them to deal with an unimaginable disaster. Brian's death was the worst part of the Galvin story. It showed that success and distance could not protect them from their family weakness. Joseph, the fifth brother, had strong delusions about past lives and imaginary masters. For example, he thought he had lived in China in the past and talked to an emperor in the clouds. Unlike his brothers, Joseph had some awareness of what was going on with him and knew that what he was experiencing was a hallucination. He couldn't ignore the difference between truth and his mind's distortions, which made his pain even worse. It became necessary to put Joseph in an institution, and he spent most of his life there. His fight showed how cruelly complicated schizophrenia is. Being aware did not mean being in control, and being smart did not protect you. Matthew, the ninth brother, was creative even though he was severely psychotic. He was a good potter and singer, and he also thought he was Paul McCartney and could make the weather happen. Small acts of calm were ruined by delusions that made him lose his job and make his family angry. Matthew's schizophrenia showed how mental illness could change the mind of even the smartest person, mixing creativity with harmful false beliefs. Even though he was taking medicine and going to therapy, his delusions didn't go away. This shows how stubborn and relentless the sickness is. After seeing his father have a serious stroke, Peter, the youngest, had his first break. The event made him so scared that he started talking in gibberish, wetting the bed, and acting wildly. After many medications, hospital stays, and attempts to stabilize him with electroconvulsive treatment, nothing worked. In Peter's case, we can see how sudden stress can cause schizophrenia, especially when genetic susceptibility is added to the mix. Putting him in an institution was another example of how the home turned into a battleground of fear, power, and survival. 6 of the boys had schizophrenia, but Michael, John, Richard, and Mark The other 4 siblings were not affected, but were still affected. Survivor's guilt, the constant fear of being the next one to be hurt, and the stress of growing up in a violent home all took a toll on their mental health. As they watched brothers break under stress, they wondered if the same thing would happen to them. Every fight, broken dish, or locked door became a warning of how fragile things are. Even though the house looked great on the outside, it had turned into a dangerous place with broken glass, threats that were never spoken, and constant stress. 2 sisters, Margaret and Mary, were hurt in secret by all of this chaos. They lived in fear, kept things secret, and were abused physically and sexually as kids. James's paranoia and actions toward them, along with the brothers' violence, caused a lot of trauma that few people could understand. Every day, they hid, locked themselves in rooms, and prayed that they would be safe. Even though they lived, the psychological scars were deep and would shape their future support and strength. When you think about how the family fell apart, you realize something very important. Schizophrenia does not explain everything. The Galvins were not only naturally more likely to have problems, but they were also mentally too stressed. Extreme parental pressure, emotional neglect, and being exposed to trauma over and over again made the sickness worse. The way that genes and external stress work together in this case shows how weak can become very dangerous in the wrong situations. The Galvin family's story shows how mental illness and family problems can affect each other and cause a lot of damage that genes alone couldn't predict. The mental toll on the family went beyond just getting by each day. The 4 boys who weren't affected lived in constant tension, being careful not to cause trouble or draw attention to themselves. Margaret and Lindsay had a childhood full of secret fear. They learned early on how to get around in a house where delusion was the norm. It was never safe in the house because of the abuse, mistreatment, and mental illness. Neighbors saw only a perfect family and didn't know the truth. Chaos and trauma ruled daily life inside those walls, leaving lifelong marks on both victims and survivors. Decades of blood samples and silent suffering would finally reveal the genetic secret hiding in plain sight. From private hell to public research, scientists were interested in the Galvin family's private horror. By the early 1980s, researchers took notice because there were already 6 brothers who had been labeled with schizophrenia. This was an unusually high number. A group of cutting-edge psychiatrists and geneticists from the National Institute of Mental Health called out to the family. They wanted to study the genetic causes of schizophrenia by getting blood, skin samples, and sometimes brain matter from brothers who had already died. For the first time, the family's pain was seen as information that might help science move forward. At first, the Galvins were careful about how they did the study. Years of shame, discrimination, and misunderstanding had taught them that mental disease made people judge, not help. Still, they decided to take part because they hoped that learning more about the disease would help other families avoid the same tragedy. Researchers carefully recorded medical histories, psychiatric evaluations, and family trends to make a map of how mental illness has spread through generations. Science became a part of the family's life, and their personal pain was used to learn more about the brain. After many years, the first big step forward was made when a variation in the SHANK2 gene was found. The mutation was found in all 6 boys who were diagnosed, as well as in their mother, Mimi. SHANK2 is important for synaptic activity, which helps brain cells talk to each other. The finding gave a real biological reason for the symptoms that had been going on in the family for generations. Researchers also discovered that some family members, including a daughter and her child, did not have the disorder. This raises many questions about why some people get schizophrenia and others only experience sadness. Prenatal studies led to a new and interesting idea. Scientists found that choline, a nutrient that is important for brain growth in the womb, might affect the chance of getting schizophrenia. Before 1965, when the older Galvin boys were born, not many people knew about prenatal nutrition. The younger children may have been healthier if their mothers had eaten better, which could have sped up or prevented sickness. This small but important factor showed that genetics and the environment worked together, even before birth. Prenatal nutrition was a hidden hero in the study of intergenerational vulnerability because it gave us a real way to lower the risk for future generations. Even with these advances, the Galvins had to lose a huge number of people. Even though their DNA helped science, the family didn't get much help or therapy. 6 boys stayed in institutions or long-term care, and they continued to suffer every day. The sisters Margaret and Lindsay, who had been through years of trauma, were mostly forgotten by the researchers. Their opinions, experiences, and emotional needs were not taken into account, which brought up a basic ethical question. Who really gains when families in pain are used as research subjects? Concerns about ethics hung over the decades-long project. In a sense, the Galvins went from being patients to data points. There wasn't much in return for participation. No money, little care, and not much recognition of the mental toll it took. At the time, psychologists were busy finding patterns, mutations, and publishing their results, while the family dealt with daily trauma on their own. The work was new, but it made people wonder if science sometimes puts people last in order to learn. It was hard to tell the difference between helping and taking advantage of people. Even with these problems, the family has made a huge difference in genetics. The Galvins were one of the first families studied by researchers, and they were important to understanding schizophrenia. Many studies have been based on the SHANK2 mutation and decades of detailed records. This has made it possible for current neurodevelopmental models to be created. Their genetic profile is still used in studies today, and their family is still a rare example of one in which more than one sibling has a severe mental illness. Despite this, the Galvins didn't feel much better after the science advances. 6 brothers who had schizophrenia continued to live their lives and were given care that focused on keeping them stable rather than curing them. Genetic progress gave families of the future hope, but it came too late to ease the pain of those who were already suffering. The family's story brings to light a disturbing tension. Great research can shed light on how diseases work, while leaving the original subjects in the dark. Breaking the silence. The 2 youngest Galvin girls, Margaret and Lindsay, grew up in a house that was full of fear and chaos. Their childhood was marked by a strict, controlling home life and violent outbursts from their older brothers. They saw people throw furniture, poison fish, and lock themselves in rooms to avoid harm. On top of that, their brother Jim sexually abused them, which left them with deep mental scars. They kept quiet as a way to stay alive, a code they learned to keep themselves safe and keep up the family image. James was one of several brothers who were sexually abused by a trusted Catholic priest, which added to their trauma. These events sparked a web of hidden pain that was kept inside for decades. Margaret and Lindsay were afraid that their brothers were sick, and their family also wanted to look perfect, so they were forced to carry guilt, shame, and secrets. They learned how to hide their feelings and their fear, and they learned how to get around in a house where danger could appear at any time. Through their early years, they learned more about how to stay alive than about being kids. In 2020, Robert Kolker's Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family, broke the silence that had been in place for decades. The book told the story of the Galvin family in fascinating detail, focusing on both the sisters' schizophrenia diagnoses and the abuse they were subjected to behind closed doors. It was picked for Oprah's book club and became a #1 hit in the New York Times. All of a sudden, millions of people heard about a family's story that had been kept secret. For the sisters, it was both a relief and a pain to have the public recognize what they had been through. The public's response was strong and split. There was a lot of talk on Reddit threads and mental health sites. Many readers were thankful that the story brought attention to serious mental illness and the problems families face. Others said the book was bad because it made schizophrenia seem angry by nature, which they said could reinforce stigma. Mental health advocates on shows like Mad in America said that complex mental conditions were made too simple for a wide audience to understand. The sisters had to deal with the paradox of being known and being lied about at the same time. The tension got worse when the HBO documentary 6 Schizophrenic Brothers came out. It gave people a visual way to see the story, but Margaret and Lindsay noticed that it focused more on the violent parts than on their family's daily problems, love, and strength. The media's focus on extreme actions often overshadowed their more complex experiences, making them feel traumatized all over again. This brought to light a hard truth. Siblings who have survived often have to deal with the pain long after the diagnosed family member is in an institution. Their pain isn't as obvious, but it's still real. From the sisters' point of view, a new and important idea comes to light. They hid their feelings for decades to keep themselves and others safe, carrying the weight of fear, shame, and secrets. While making their family's story more dramatic in the media helped bring attention to the issue, it also ran the risk of reopening old scars. People who have survived mental illness in their family often have to deal with both their own pain and the public perception of their loved ones' conditions. The Galvin sisters' story shows that even when medical attention is focused on the affected, those left behind can have psychic effects that last a lifetime. Even with these problems, Margaret and Lindsay turned their pain into a voice for others. They told their story to bring attention to mental illness and stress, the importance of understanding, support, and kindness. By coming out, they fought against stigma and made it clear how important it is to treat psychiatric conditions with the whole family in mind. Their work helped families understand that schizophrenia affects more than just the person who has it. It affects siblings, parents, and even whole towns. They spoke up for people with severe mental illness who don't have a say and live in the shadows. Behind every breakthrough, there's a price. And for this family, the shadows remain. The shadow. They left behind. The story of the Galvin family shocked the world and changed the field of science. Researchers made big steps forward in understanding schizophrenia thanks to their help. The focus shifted from blaming mothers to finding biological and neurodevelopmental reasons. Studies of their DNA found mutations, such as SHANK2, that helped scientists learn more about how synapses work and how the brain grows. Researchers also looked into things that happen before birth, like not getting enough choline, which might make a person more likely to develop psychiatric problems. Modern ideas like anosognosia, which explains why patients may not be aware of their sickness, are based on what they went through. But the Galvins never got the full benefits of the science they made possible. 6 brothers lived and died with severe mental illness. They were often locked up or needed care, and there was no chance that they would get better. The sisters went through pain and shame while protecting their brothers' lives and genetic information. The parents never got back to normal or found peace, which was something they really wanted. The family gave science a lot, but didn't get much in return, which is a sad paradox of giving without getting anything in return. There are bigger issues at play in their story than just biology. Families today can learn how important it is to get help early, be aware of stress, and set up support systems for siblings. Mental sickness doesn't just affect the person who has it. It affects whole families and has long-lasting effects on their mental health. The Galvins show that patients should be treated like people, not just like things to be studied. To keep hidden suffering from building up behind closed doors, people need to get the right kind of counseling, advocacy, and group support. Stigma is still a big problem. Even though the Galvin's story is extreme, most people with schizophrenia are not violent, and making them seem like they are could lead to more fear and confusion. Some people who don't like how the media portrays illnesses say that only showing dramatic or violent events makes them seem less complicated. The family's story should make people more careful and nuanced when they talk about mental illness in public. Along with awareness, we need to show empathy and avoid making what is already a very painful truth into something exciting. When you think about the unfinished research burden, you can see a new angle. Families who help make scientific progress often carry the weight of unmet expectations, unanswered questions, and trauma that isn't recognized. For research reasons, the Galvins shared decades of their lives, went through pain, and talked about their private pain. Even though science was getting better, their personal problems were still not fixed. This load isn't often thought about, but it shows how ethically and emotionally responsible researchers are to the families who take part in their studies. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click on the next video popping up on your screen for more amazing content.